The morning my granddaughter called me at 5:47 a.m., I was already awake. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee, watching the sky go from black to that deep bruised purple it gets before sunrise out here in East Tennessee. I'm 71 years old. I don't sleep much anymore. I haven't since my wife passed. When I saw her name light up my phone, Lily, my first thought was that something bad had happened. Young people don't call at that hour with good news. Grandpa, her voice was quiet, not scared exactly. More like she was choosing her words very carefully, the way you do when you've been rehearsing something. I'm here, sweetheart. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. A pause. I could hear her breathing. Don't wear your silver pocket watch today, please. I know that sounds strange. Just trust me. I almost laughed. Almost. Lily, that watch has been in my pocket every day for 43 years. It was your great-grandfather's. I know what it is, Grandpa. Another pause longer. Please, just not today. Then she said she had to go, and the line went quiet. I sat there for a long time after that, holding the phone, listening to the house settle around me. Outside, a mockingbird started up in the old oak tree by the fence line. I looked down at the watch where it sat on the table. I'd taken it out of my robe pocket without even thinking about it. The way old men do with things they've carried so long, the habit runs deeper than thought. The silver case was worn smooth on one side. The engraving on the back, my grandfather's initials and the year 1951, had faded to something you had to know was there to see it. I picked it up, turned it over twice, and set it back down. Then I put it in my robe pocket and went to get dressed. I didn't wear it that day. I'm not a superstitious man. 32 years working as a civil engineer in Knoxville will do that to you. Everything has a reason, a load-bearing calculation, a structural explanation. But Lily had never once called me before sunrise in her life, and there was something in her voice I couldn't shake. Not fear. Something quieter than fear. Certainty. So I left the watch on the nightstand and drove into town without it. I had an appointment at the county clerk's office to follow up on some property paperwork. Nothing exciting, just the kind of bureaucratic loose end that piles up when you get older and your affairs get complicated. My son and his wife had been helping me manage things since my wife passed 18 months ago, and there was a document I needed to review. I remember parking the truck, walking up the stone steps, and nodding to the woman at the front desk who'd worked there for 20 years and knew me by name. Then I sat down in the waiting area and picked up a 3-month-old copy of Field and Stream and didn't read a single word of it, because 15 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies came through the front door, and the look on their faces told me this wasn't a routine visit. They were looking for someone who matched my description, 70-ish, white hair, wearing a silver pocket watch on a fob chain. They'd been called to a scene on the highway outside of town. A man matching that description had been found, and they needed to identify him quickly. I stood up slowly. I think you might be looking for me. What happened? The younger deputy, a kid who couldn't have been more than 26, looked at me the way people look at something that doesn't make sense. Sir, do you carry a silver pocket watch? Normally, yes, not today. They asked me to step outside. What they told me next took a few minutes to fully land. A man had been found on Route 11W, just outside Blaine. He was wearing my description down to the wire. Same age range, same build, white hair, flannel shirt. He had a silver pocket watch in his breast pocket. He had a wallet with no ID, and he was dead. Not from natural causes. The detective who arrived 20 minutes later, a woman named Okafor, with close-cropped hair and the kind of stillness that comes from having seen everything, asked me to sit in her car and talk through some things. The watch, she said. Can you describe yours? Silver case, hinged lid. Engraving on the back, my grandfather's initials, EJP, and the year 1951. The crystal is slightly chipped at 4 o'clock. She looked at something on her phone and said nothing for a moment. Mr. Pruitt, she said. That's my name, Elliot Pruitt. The watch we recovered matches that description. The inside of her car was very quiet. That's not possible, I said. My watch is sitting on my nightstand at home. We'll need to verify that. I called Lily before we left for my house. She picked up on the second ring, and I could tell she'd been waiting. You didn't wear it, she said. It wasn't a question. No, Lily, how did you know? What did you know? The silence that followed was the kind that has a shape to it. I'll explain when you get here, she said. I'm already at your house. I've been here since 6. My granddaughter is 23 years old. She studies criminal justice at UT Knoxville and works part-time at a diner on Cumberland Avenue. She's sharp in a quiet way, doesn't say much, but when she does, you listen. She's always been like that, even as a little girl. My wife used to say Lily has the kind of eyes that see around corners. When I pulled up with Detective Okafor behind me, Lily was sitting on the porch steps with a mug of coffee she'd made herself from my kitchen. She stood up when she saw me, and I could see she was relieved. I was not yet relieved. I was somewhere between confused and unsteady, in a way I hadn't felt in years. We sat in my living room. Me, Lily, Detective Okafor, and a second officer who stood near the doorway and took notes. The watch was still on my nightstand upstairs. Okafor had photographed it and sent the image to someone. I watched her face while she waited for the response, and I still couldn't read anything in it. Lily told them what she'd seen. 3 days earlier, she'd been driving home from a late shift at the diner, coming down the back road that runs behind my property. She uses it as a shortcut sometimes because the highway gets backed up. It was nearly midnight. She'd slowed down because of deer, she said, and that's when her headlights swept across 2 figures standing at the edge of my fence line. One of them, she said, was my son's wife. Her name is Deborah. She married my son, Nate, 6 years ago. I will be honest with you. I never fully trusted Deborah, and I always felt guilty about that because I couldn't name a reason. She was pleasant. She was organized. She remembered birthdays and brought covered dishes when people were sick. But there was something in the way she watched me manage my property, a calculation behind her eyes that I noticed and told myself I was imagining. Lily did not have the same guilt about noticing things. The second figure at my fence line, Lily said, was a man she didn't recognize. They were standing close together, talking. One of them was holding something. When her headlights hit them, they stepped back into the tree line and were gone. She hadn't told me right away because she didn't know what she'd seen. Maybe nothing. People walk around at night sometimes. But it nagged at her. And 2 days later, at the diner, she overheard a phone conversation. The booth right behind the counter, a man she didn't know, and she caught fragments, a name, a description. Something about making sure it looked right. She couldn't explain why, but she thought of me, and she thought of my watch. Because I wore it every single day, and it was the most distinctive thing about me, and anyone who knew me for more than a week knew about it. She called me at 5:47 that morning because she was scared and she didn't know what to say except the one thing she was certain of. Detective Okafor asked her questions for 90 minutes. She was patient and methodical, and I respected that about her. Lily answered everything clearly without embellishing. When Okafor finally looked at me, she said, "Mr. Pruitt, I need to ask you about your property arrangements." And that's when I understood that this had never been random. My property, 41 acres in Granger County, the farmhouse, a small barn, and the woodlot my father planted in 1962, is worth considerably more than it looks. The land itself is valuable because of where it sits relative to a planned infrastructure corridor. I'd been approached twice in the past 2 years by developers. I had turned them down both times because this land is the only thing left that my wife and I built together. I wasn't ready to let it go. Nate had been pushing me to reconsider, gently at first, then less gently. His argument was always practical. You're 71, the upkeep is too much. You could live comfortably for the rest of your life on what you'd get from a sale. Which was all true. But every time we talked about it, Deborah was in the background somewhere, and the conversation felt less like my son's concern and more like strategy. 4 months earlier, I'd been presented with a document to sign. Nate and Deborah had brought it over on a Sunday afternoon along with a pot roast and a bottle of wine, and I remember feeling vaguely uneasy about the combination. The document was described to me as an estate planning update, a new power of attorney arrangement that would make it easier to manage things, they said, if I ever had a health issue. I was tired that day. My hip had been bad all week. I signed it without having my own attorney review it, which was the single stupidest thing I've done in 20 years, and I knew it about 30 seconds after I did it. 3 weeks later, when I finally brought it to my attorney, he read it quietly for about 4 minutes, and then looked at me over his glasses with an expression I did not like at all. It was not a standard power of attorney. The document I signed had included a provision, buried in the third page in language designed to be unreadable, that gave Nate and Deborah the authority to act on my behalf in property transactions if 2 licensed physicians certified that I was experiencing cognitive decline. It was structured just carefully enough to be legal, just obscured enough that most people would miss it. I had missed it. My attorney, a man named Calvin Reed, who has handled my family's affairs for 18 years, filed a challenge the same week. But challenges take time, and time, as it turned out, was exactly what someone was trying to manage. Okafor came back 2 days later. The man found on Route 11W had been identified. His name was involved in a small-time fraud operation out of Morristown. Document forgery, identity staging, the kind of thing that orbits around estate fraud without ever quite touching it directly in ways that are easy to prosecute. He had a wallet built to suggest an identity. He had my description because someone had given it to him in detail. What he was meant to do, what Okafor laid out to me carefully and without drama, was appear to be me, in a location where I should have been that morning, and be found in circumstances that would raise serious questions about my mental and physical state. The watch was the identifier. It was distinctive enough that anyone who knew me would recognize it, and that recognition was the whole point. The plan, as near as investigators could piece it together, was to create documentation suggesting I had become disoriented and wandered, which would feed directly into an existing legal process designed to have my capacity formally questioned. 2 physicians had already been contacted. One of them had agreed to a meeting with Nate and Deborah that I was not informed of. It was, in the words of the assistant district attorney, who called me on a Thursday morning, one of the more sophisticated elder fraud attempts she'd seen that hadn't involved a nursing home. I sat in my kitchen after that call and looked at my watch on the table in front of me and thought about my wife, Marion, who'd been gone 18 months and who I still talked to sometimes when the house got too quiet. I thought about what she would have said about all of this. She had never trusted Deborah either. She'd been more honest about it than I was. I thought about Nate. That was the part I kept coming back to and then moving away from, the way you move away from something hot. My son, who had sat across from me at my own kitchen table and talked about my future, as though he were explaining something to a child. Who had brought pot roast and wine to soften a document, designed to take from me the only thing I hadn't lost yet. I don't know, even now, exactly how much Nate understood about what Deborah had been planning. I'm not sure I'll ever know. What I know is what he did and what he didn't do. And I know that for a long time I made excuses for the difference. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Partly because of the fraud investigation, and partly because Calvin Reed is the kind of attorney who treats injustice toward his clients like a personal insult. The fraudulent provisions in the document I'd signed were voided. The power of attorney challenge was resolved in my favor. The two physicians were reported to the state medical board, and one of them surrendered his license before the year was out. The man from Morristown cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge. His cooperation is what put Deborah in the center of the picture, with enough specificity that the DA moved forward. Her trial took 8 months to complete. I testified for about 40 minutes. I was calm. I had prepared carefully, and I answered every question I was asked without elaboration. The jury deliberated for less than a day. She was convicted on 2 counts of elder financial fraud and 1 count of conspiracy. She was sentenced to 4 years. Nate did not attend the trial. He and Deborah had separated after her arrest, and he'd moved to Chattanooga. We had spoken once, briefly by phone. He did not offer an explanation, and I did not ask for one. There are conversations that can only happen when both people are ready for them, and neither of us was ready. Maybe we will be someday. I don't know. What I know is that I still own 41 acres in Granger County. I still wake up before sunrise and drink cold coffee and watch the sky change color out the east window. My hip still gives me trouble in cold weather, and the barn roof needs replacing. And there are 3 fence posts along the lower pasture that have been leaning since September. And every morning before I leave the house, I put my grandfather's watch in my pocket. The one with his initials on the back and the chipped crystal at 4 o'clock. The one I didn't wear on a Tuesday morning in March, because a 23-year-old girl called me before sunrise and asked me to trust her. Lily came out to the property last weekend. She helped me clear out some brush along the fence line, and we ate dinner at the picnic table my wife and I built in 1997, and the evening was quiet in the way that good evenings are quiet, full rather than empty. At some point, I asked her how she'd known. Not the specific details, which I already understood, but the deeper knowing, the part where she'd made a call at 5:47 in the morning and said only the thing she was sure of. She thought about it for a moment the way she does. I didn't know everything, she said. I just knew that watch meant you. If something was going to happen that was supposed to look like you, it would have that watch in it. She picked up her fork again, then put it down. Grandma always said you were the most identifiable person she'd ever met, she said. Same coat, same truck, same watch, same chair at church. She said you never changed because you never needed to. She meant it as the best thing about you. I didn't say anything for a while after that. The fireflies were starting up at the edge of the tree line, and somewhere down the hill the mockingbird was at it again. Marion had said that to me once. I remembered it now, sitting right here at this table a long time ago, when the kids were small and the property was still new to us, and the world felt like it had more room in it. She'd looked at me in that certain way she had, and she'd said, "You are so reliably yourself." I don't know whether to find that comforting or boring, and then she'd laughed, because she'd already decided. I'm not a man who cries easily. I haven't been since I was young. But I sat there at that table in the last light and felt something in my chest that was too big and too gentle to name. And I let it stay for a while before I cleared the plates. They mistook my age for fragility. They mistook my routine for predictability they could exploit. They mistook my quiet for confusion and my trust for carelessness. What they never accounted for was a girl with eyes that see around corners, who learned from her grandmother to pay attention to the small things, the details that stay constant because the person they belong to has nothing to prove and nowhere to be other than exactly who he is. I am 71 years old. I have buried a wife and outlasted a betrayal, and I still get up before sunrise every single morning. Don't mistake that for anything other than what it is.